I should have known it was in the back here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Hey, it's not a problem at all. I do this sort of thing all the time, so not a problem.
I mean, when you say it like that, it kind of seems like this is the first time you're doing it.
No, God, no. This has been the setup for like 5 of these episodes by now, so trust me, not a problem. Where's the ghost?
Out there. But I should warn you, there's also a Class 5 free roaming vapor around, but I would let that one go. Kind of cute.
All right, noted. I'm on it.
Wait, you can't go out there like that.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Good luck.
You're the ghost.
Yeah, that's me.
Huh. I thought you'd be harder to find than this. I guess you're gonna have to get busted.
So, you're just like not afraid of me?
I ain't afraid of no ghost.
You know, I really do want to move on. I just have so much unfinished business.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I could help you with that. Like, what is the unfinished business?
I just have so many unanswered questions about Ghostbusters.
Yeah, all right. That's kind of what I figured it was going to be. All right, look. How about this? How about I will answer any questions that you have, and then you can move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Question number 1.
So, like, what was Slimer when he was a human?
Slimer. The character that was never meant to be a big deal, and then totally was. You see, early on in the film, the Ghostbusters are on their first big job at the Sedgwick Hotel. He's first encountered by Ray, who sees him chomping down on a bunch of food from the service cart, and then tries to blast him, causing the little dude to fly away and slime Peter. They manage to catch him, but he's released later on when Walter Peck shuts down the containment unit and we see him loose in New York. He reappears in the second film, having a sort of Tom and Jerry thing going on with Lewis, but in the end, he actually helps him get to where Vigo is to save the day. A version of him appeared in the 2016 reboot, although he was absent from Afterlife, and is coming back to make an appearance in Frozen Empire. But what exactly is Slimer? If he's a ghost, then of who or what? Well, this answer is actually more complicated than it seems, but first, let's do some behind-the-scenes stuff. He was designed for the original film by special effects legend Steve Johnson, and he claims that it was an extremely lengthy process as the executives just could not decide on what exactly they wanted with him. Apparently, one day before deadline, Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis had commented that the designs reminded them of Bluto from Animal House and thought it would be fun to have it be a sort of an homage to him, as he had just died a few years earlier. I don't know if he's joking because it was the 80s, so anything went, but Johnson claims that in honor of that, he took 3 grams of coke and envisioned Belushi's ghosts visiting him to guide his hand and created the version that exists in the film. He wasn't called Slimer at this point and was actually called the Onion Head Ghost because the puppet stunk like onions. The word is not used in the film nor in the script and didn't come around until the real Ghostbusters animated show that debuted in 1986. There, they introduced the character as a sort of a comic relief mascot and had Ray name him Slimer because of the incident with Venkman. He's actually not even called that in the films at all, except in the end credits of Ghostbusters 2. That name is never said on screen. But what or who is he? Here's what we know. In the first film, after he's captured, Ray says that he's a focused, non-terminal repeating phantasm, or a Class 5 full roaming vapor. Now, there's a good deal of outside material when it comes to the Ghostbusters, and clearly not all of it relates directly to the film. For instance, the real Ghostbusters cartoon is clearly its own continuity, and the characteristics of Slimer there don't apply to the film version. That goes for the later cartoon shows as well, like Extreme Ghostbusters. And at one point, on the cartoon, there was a script that would go into the character's backstory, making him a short, chubby man who died from overeating. But clearly, that's not applicable to the film version. The same kind of goes for any of the comic book versions, as there's a couple of those now, and they're their own thing. The Marvel UK comic, The Real Ghostbusters, actually gave the guy a different origin, making him King Ramils, which is Nilbog spelled backwards, and was again an obese man, a king this time, who died of gluttony. There's also the video game, which at one point was said to be canon, but since Afterlife came out and there's elements there that seem contradictory, although Aykroyd says it is, but Ivan Reitman says it isn't, so who knows? But that very video game does give us some solid information, since it shows us entries in Tobin's Spirit Guide, the information source the Ghostbusters get a good deal of their info from. We know that Slimer is a Class 5 entity, and that's said to be a sort of mid-level specter. It takes on a non-humanoid form, which is why Slimer doesn't look like a person. The game also gives us an entry in which Ray is discussing Slimer himself and says that vaporous manifestations aren't so much human-based, but are manifestations of raw psychic energy and could represent some sort of primal vice like gluttony or rage. They have human characteristics and faces, but aren't actually bound to any human spirit. And even though it's not specifically canon, it certainly keeps in line with the film, since he is quite different than some of the other ghosts that we see them encounter. And in fact, one of the only times we see ones that are tied to a human spirit is the Scoleri brothers, who are described as full torso apparitions, and external material tagged them as Class 4, anchored, non-corporeal elemental spirits, clearly different than Slimer. The fact that Ray refers to it as a focused, non-terminal repeating phantasm means it's focused, which means it's tied to the location, so it's stuck at the hotel, or at least it is until they trap it and release it. And then it's a non-terminal repeating phantasm, which is, and it's pretty amazing for him to just figure out just by looking at it. That's meant to mean that it's repeating its actions. And I think that the whole non-terminal is meant to refer to the repeating, but it could also refer to the spirit itself, meaning it's non-terminal. It didn't die, as in it was never human, which was backed up by it being a manifestation of gluttony. Oh, and also, there's an official book called Tobin's Spirit Guide by Eric Burnham, and in it, it theorizes that he was called up by the cult of Gozer, which held meetings at the Sedgwick in the 20s and got loose, and he remained in the hotel since, although the return of Gozer riled it up once again, accounting for its activity in the first film. And holy crap, this answer was way longer than I expected. Question number 2.
So, what happens if you look at the trap?
The trap is one of the most important tools in the Busters repertoire. The way their busting works is that they use the proton streams to entangle the ghosts and sort of lasso them, and then they pull them down into the traps, which opens up on the top and seals once a spirit is stuck inside. Once closed, they would then take it to the containment unit, where they would be released into the grid. That's one way to bust. The other way that busting works is that it makes you feel good. The proton pack isn't essential to the process, since if a ghost passes directly over a trap, they can be sucked right in, like the jogger ghost in Part 2. But there's an interesting moment in the first film where they first introduce a trap and activate it. Ray tells everyone that they should not look directly into the trap. The reasoning for this is never really discussed in the film, and there seems to be a sort of split online when discussing it. There's a contingency out there that has this prevailing theory that the trap works by ensnaring a soul. Since they're capturing spiritual beings, and the trap does not seem to have an effect on human beings and pull them in, that they're trapping the souls of the entities. This theory seems to mainly stem from a popular 2007 fan film called Return of the Ghostbusters, which was a sequel to a different fan film called Freddy vs. Ghostbusters. In that film, they bring up the whole trap soul theory and state that the reason that you shouldn't look directly into the trap is because it will entrap a portion of your soul when you do so. The longer you look, the more that gets taken, as the eyes are the window to the soul. This theory has been given a bit of credibility since the fan film is sort of seen as canon. It seems that the Ghostbusters video game, which at one point was considered canon to the film series, makes a reference to the fan film, which would then bring it into the official status as well. Now, in the first film, Egon says that he looked into the trap and he didn't seem to have his soul taken, but again, it's about the amount of time, so since he didn't look long, then it didn't take much. Now, that's one theory, but I prefer the second one, and it's much, much simpler. Don't look at the trap because it's freaking bright. Like, really bright. Ray says you're not supposed to look at it because you're not supposed to look at a very bright object at all, like the sun or an eclipse or something. Like, you don't look directly into one unless you're a complete and total moron. Egon looks at the trap and doesn't suffer any ill effects, although likely still saw spots in front of his eyes, which would happen if you look into a bright object. I see this backed up a bit with the jogger ghost. Now, Peter appears to be looking directly towards it as it activated, and his eyes seem open, and yet when they show him waving goodbye in that weirdly edited shot that looks like they cut off a bit of his dialogue, his eyes are closed and blinking a bit, the result of looking into a very bright object. Question number 3.
So what's up with crossing the streams?
So I already talked about the proton packs a little bit, but let's go further. The beams work through this gear here. It's a proton pack, which is worn on the back and has cables that run into these guns called particle throwers. They throw out streams of positively charged ion particles, which are what ensnares the ghosts and holds them in place and allows the busters to pull them down into a trap. But the important thing that's mentioned by the crew in the first movie is that you should never cross the streams. In fact, if you cross the streams, Egon says it will result in total protonic reversal, and all life as we know it will stop instantaneously, and every molecule in your body will explode at the speed of light. Now, there's 2 points to this question because the first relates to that aspect, and then the second comes back up at the end of the film. The first part is just, like, I don't know, why take the chance? Like, Egon makes it sound like crossing the streams is not only dangerous to the wearers, but also to the entire world, and the streams themselves look pretty damn chaotic. They don't really follow a straight line, so it's not like you can just try not to cross the streams, since the way that they bounce about, they're likely to just meet up at some point on their own anyway. But I think if you look at the end of the movie, when they deliberately cross them, it looks like it takes genuine effort to do so. It appears as if the streams don't actually want to cross and oppose each other like the same sides of a magnet, or the Friday the 13th series in continuity. Considering that the proton packs are said to carry positively charged ions, this makes sense since they would all be like a positive charge of a magnet and naturally repel each other. Now, to take that one step further, the video game has Egon mention that the streams have some sort of anti-crossing field that they need to deactivate in order to do so. I guess that would work as well, and the instruments have safeguards, and it's thought that he may have added those after their fight with Slimer and seeing how all over the place that those suckers went. But I kind of prefer the other option, since we see just how much it took to actually make the streams meet. But then there's the other part of the question. If Egon says that crossing the streams will cause all destruction and kill the users, and they do that, and then yet nothing happens, then what's the point? Well, what if it did do that? There's an old fan theory that I like that states that since they crossed the streams at the doorway between dimensions, and Gozer's world was an empty hell dimension, crossing the streams had the desired effect and destroyed that universe, just that other dimensional one. It destroyed that entire universe and took Gozer with it. Considering that Gozer was trapped in a pocket dimension that was designed to hold it, it's not like they were destroying innocent life, but that destruction was enough to break the portal and keep Gozer trapped. Now, in Afterlife, they do it again, but this time Gozer is able to uncross the streams, and that simply could be that Egon refined the streams over time in order to make them clearly less destructive than what they had been before, which clearly has less of an effect since he had come up with an alternate method of dealing with the G-Man that didn't require destroying an entire universe. Question number 4.
So what exactly was up with that ghost DJ?
Yeah, well, Ghostbusters walks this pretty great balance. I wouldn't say that the comedy in the film is necessarily for kids, but I also feel that it's family friendly. There's some crass jokes, but nothing really that you wouldn't say in front of your rabbi. But then there's that one scene, that one bit that just feels like it's from a different movie. During a montage of their activities while battling ghosts and doing TV interviews, we see the guys sleeping, and then a dream sequence of Ray being visited by a ghost who undoes his pants and then proceeds to give him a ghost blowjob, which makes his eyes go crossed. And not only does it not seem to fit the tone of the rest of the movie, but it's kind of not really that funny. But the story behind this scene is actually pretty interesting, and I guess explains it a bit. And it's just not some random thing that they decided to throw in there, although it almost sounds like it if you listen to Dan Aykroyd. In an interview, he talked about how ghosts doing sexual things to people is very common in paranormal research, and that he had friends that had extreme carnal encounters with spirits. And it sure seems like he wanted to put more of that kind of stuff in there, since his comment was, in under 2 hours, you obviously can't have everything. But they did have it. For better or worse, they did have it. But that one snippet was originally meant to be part of a much larger plot. There's an entire segment of the film that was meant to occur at a place called Fort Detmering. Peter was at Dana's house, and Egon was running tests on Lewis. There's that part where Ray and Winston are driving in the Ecto and discussing the last days of the Bible. They were meant to be answering a call at a place called Fort Detmering, and while there, the pair would split up to search for it. Ray would then be seduced by the beautiful woman ghost, and the moment that's in the movie would occur. But that's not where it would have ended, since this moment was set up to sort of give Ray a love interest. If you look closely at the scene, you can see that Ray is wearing a fancy jacket, and that's because he donned a colonial officer's jacket, and the ghost apparently mistook him for her husband. Afterwards, Ray would tell his friends that he was in love with the ghost, and there would be a scene at the ending showing him returning there for another visit. Part of it was shot, and that part's still in the film, before Ivan Reitman decided that the whole bit was just too long and threw off the pacing of the film, so it was scrapped. But he also realized that they still needed shots for the montage sequence, so instead of shooting something new, they just put some pressure on the already overworked effects crew to do the ghost effect and kept it in. And aren't we all just so happy they did? Question number 5.
Isn't that just I Want a New Drug?
You all know the song. When someone says, "Who you gonna call?" the answer is obviously Ghostbusters. And sure, that line is said in the second movie.
Someone has to deal with it, and who are you gonna call?
But it was actually a reference to the song from the first film, the infamous Ray Parker Jr. song, Ghostbusters. Not to be confused with that other Ray Parker Jr. hit song. Yeah. And I'm only kind of joking because Parker did have some successful tunes outside of this one, but nothing that came anywhere close to this level of popularity. And look, I'm not saying that the movie would not have been as popular as it was without the song in it, but I'm also saying that you can't say that it would have been as popular without it. The song has become massively iconic, and so did the video, with most of Hollywood getting involved and making a cameo in it. There's only one problem though. What song is this? And yeah, in case you didn't know, that's the opening part and main riff to the song by Huey Lewis and the News called I Want a New Drug. In case you don't quite hear it, here's the two parts back to back. The similarity was also noticed by other people, including Lewis, whose real name is Hugh Anthony Craig III, by the way, and he said, yeah, I need to do something about that. So, a little bit after the release of the film, he sued for plagiarism, claiming that the bass line of their song was stolen and copied for the Ghostbusters theme. They sued for $5 million, but the matter was actually settled out of court, although the end result of that suit was not discussed at the time. However, in 2001 on VH1's Behind the Music, Lewis talked about the incident and said that the offensive part was not so much that the Ray Parker Jr. had ripped this song off. It was symbolic of an industry that wants something. They wanted our wave. They wanted to buy it. It's not for sale. But in the end, I suppose they were right. I suppose it was for sale, because basically they bought it. That strongly states that he was ultimately paid for the song and that the settlement went in his favor. The only thing is that one of the stipulations of the agreement was that neither party could discuss the suit, and Parker alleged that Lewis broke it with this statement and sued him. I guess there was no confidentiality clause involved there, since Parker stated that he received at least $30,000 out of that suit in a TV interview. But what about the song? Was it ripped off? Well, it turns out that the answer is a resounding yes. In an interview with Esquire magazine in 2014, Ivan Reitman flat out admitted to it. He said, "We kept looking for a song in the montage. I was a big Huey Lewis fan, and I put in I Want a New Drug as a temp score for screenings." It was also said in a different interview with Premiere magazine back in 2004 that they had offered to hire Lewis to do the theme, but they declined. And then they give the film footage with Lewis's song in the background to aid him in the writing of the theme. And then they gave the film footage with Lewis's song in the background to aid Parker in writing the theme. But then Reitman kind of backtracks that in the Esquire interview and seems to indicate that Parker wasn't given I Want a New Drug, saying that Parker came to them with the song, and it had a similar riff, but it was totally original, and yet they settled, even though there was lots of songs that were similar, that a bass hook that sounds alike alone isn't copyright infringement. But Ivan, come on. It's, more than a little similar of a bass hook. But then it gets juicier, because in a 2012 interview on a show called Loose Women, Parker said that the producers came to him with a specific sound in mind, which would seem to lean more towards they wanted something to sound like the track they had already set to go. But no matter how much it seems like a shameless copy, there's no way anyone else in the world outside of Ray Parker Jr. that could come up with the phrase, "Bustin' makes me feel good," and make it part of a chart-topping song. Bustin' makes me feel good. Question number 6.
So, who was Oscar's dad?
At the end of the first Ghostbusters, Peter Venkman and Dana Barrett hook up and seem to spark a little love. But when the sequel came around, several years have passed, 5 in fact, and the two have been split for some time. But Dana has a baby, a new one, and he's said to be around 8 months old. We're told with no questions at all that the baby is not Peter's, and when he meets the child, it's the first that they're encountering each other. But whose kid is it? Who's the dad? Well, the movie never says so it could literally be anyone, but that hasn't stopped people from speculating. Most fans actually think that it's the guy from the first film that Dana is seen with. Since Peter calls that guy Mr. Right in the sequel, it's thought that she may have split with Peter and went back to him. But there's someone that thinks a little differently. Ivan Reitman said in a 2016 interview with Rolling Stone that he thought that Oscar was most likely the child of Dana and Peter. And some people have thought that the baby might be Lewis's, since it's implied that their two possessed forms had sex at the ending of the first film. And to those people, you know how babies work, right? Like, you know about the whole 9-month thing, right? And I don't think that the whole Peter thing works either, since Peter doesn't ever seem to think that the baby could be his. He treats the kid like someone else's, and I would think that if they had slept together in the time frame that was necessary, he'd have some suspicion. It would have required him to have had sex a little longer than a year and a half before the movie started, and I'm guessing that the timing was enough that he didn't think it could be his, or else I'm sure it would at least come up. That seems like something that Peter would mention frequently. And Reitman couldn't seem to decide anyway, since on a DVD commentary for the movie, he seemed to ping-pong between thinking it was Peter and the violinist guy anyway. And oh yeah, that other guy is a violinist. He's actually only credited as the violinist in the ending credits, although he is given a name in the novelization of the first film. There, he's named Andre Wallens, although that name is never said on the screen. But he's a violinist, and in the second film, Dana says that Oscar's father left because he got a job in Europe with an orchestra, so it only makes sense that he'd be the guy. In fact, one of the producers thinks so as well. Joe Medjick, a producer of pretty much every Ghostbuster film so far, as well as the cartoons, said on the same DVD commentary that the father is the violin guy, and Sigourney Weaver agrees. She said in an interview on the Arsenio Hall show that she thinks that he's the dad.
I've gotten married, I think, to the guy who used the nose spray in the first Ghostbusters, and it didn't work out, and so I got a divorce, but I have this little baby.
Now, there are rumors, although I'm pretty doubtful, that Oscar will return in Frozen Empire. So I guess it could be revealed who the father is. But one thing's for sure. Whoever Oscar's father is, they should know that he smells bad and is a terrible burden on his mother. Question number 7.
And then why did Vigo need Oscar?
So in Ghostbusters 2, the villain is this guy named Vigo the Carpathian. He was a priest and an evil ruler and conqueror, and was killed during a rebellion, and his spirit possessed a painting. When the River of Slime activated the painting and he was able to draw power from it, he gained enough energy to start affecting the physical world. In order to be reborn, he possesses the museum worker, Janos, and told him to bring a child.
A child.
And then goes after Oscar, claiming him and bringing him to the site where the painting is. There, the Vigs tries to get loose and take Oscar's form and be renewed into his body. But why Oscar? Well, this is a question that I've seen online a few times, and I think that this one is a bit of an easier answer and likely one of the shorter ones here. But there have been those online who have thought that Vigo does need Oscar in specific, and the possessed Janos was seeking him in particular. There's the possibility that there's some sort of bloodline connection, or that Dana's role as the gatekeeper may have made her offspring special in some way that made him better for takeover than any other child. But I think that the simpler answer here is the right one. Even though Janos is possessed, he still seems to retain his sense of self. It's still Janos, but a form of him is under sway, so he still has his regular memories and life experiences. Therefore, when Vigo asks him for a child, he goes to the only child that he really knows, the child of his co-worker, Dana Barrett. He literally could have picked any kid in New York City and it would have been acceptable enough for Vigo, but it's Janos, and he doesn't seem to get out much or have a big social circle, and he chose Oscar, which is a shame, because in terms of a vessel for Vigo, he could have selected a kid who wasn't ugly. I mean, he's not Elephant Man ugly. He's definitely not attractive. Question number 8.
And you know, it's like, where did the mood slime even come from?
This one is pretty wild, because when I saw this when I was younger, I always assumed that Vigo and the mood slime were connected and that he was responsible for it. However, over the course of the film, it's actually pretty obvious that the slime is more neutral, and at the ending, it's used to combat Vigo the Butch even. But where did it come from? In the movie, we see that there's a whole river of it under the city, running through a forgotten sewer area. It reacts to emotion and feelings, so if you say angry things to it, it reacts aggressively. If you're nice to it, it responds in a more jovial manner. It seems that when Vigo's painting was transferred to the city, the spiritual force trapped within sensed the slime running underneath and was able to use it and feed off of it. He was able to use it to enhance his powers and could even control it, using it to try to get at Oscar. In the finale, the guys are able to use a positively charged bunch of it not only to animate the Statue of Liberty and get into the museum, but it's also used to counteract the effects of Vigo's possession on Janos. But what is it? What was it doing under the city in the first place? Well, there's a definitive answer for this one, and it actually comes from the Ghostbusters video game. Now, this game is what they generally refer to as secondary canon, and that it differs from the main continuity of the films, even if the differences are slight. But in the game, the origin of the mood slime is revealed. We know from the films and the game that Ivo Shandor was the guy who designed the high-rise in the first film, and is revealed to be the head of a cult that worshipped Gozer and is trying to allow it to cross over into our realm. The video game details quite a bit of his cult's other activities, and it seems that at one point they were able to open a door to a different hell dimension and capture a young Slore, one of the things that the Keymaster mentioned in the first film. Shandor's crew imprisoned the Slore beneath his mansion, and the creature's anger manifested in a thick black slime. The cult then experimented with this slime and were able to convert it over time into what would become the mood slime. They then pushed it through their secret tunnels underground to help use in their later actions. There, it ran unseen until Vigo took notice of it and amplified it for his own use. Question number 9.
I mean, why didn't Rowan just freeze the Ghostbusters?
Oh look, it's a reboot question. Look, I know that people don't like the 2016 Ghostbusters. I don't like the 2016 Ghostbusters. It's not my cup of tea. But honestly, I really don't think it's half as terrible as people make it out to be. Like, you hear people talk about it like it's the worst thing that has ever been made, and watching even 5 minutes of it is sheer torture. But for real, it's just a mediocre Hollywood comedy. I have some real issues with it, and I think that there's actual missed opportunity there. But when someone tells me it's one of the worst movies that they've ever seen, I just assume they haven't seen many movies. Because it's not that bad. It is bad, but not that bad. Like, at all. But there's one point of the movie that's particularly head-scratching. The main villain of the movie is a guy named Rowan, who turns himself into a ghost and has extra powers and attempts to, I don't know, take over the world with his ghost army. And a major moment of the movie is where Rowan, while possessing Chris Hemsworth, who is this film's kinda Janine character, also takes control of the police and army and freezes them in place. But then, the Ghostbusters arrive to take him out, and there's a big battle in the streets. He's just watching. So, I don't know, why not just freeze them like he did the army? Well, this is one of the more common questions I see in regards to this film, because it is one of the more egregious moments of logic in this. So, well, why? I mean, part of it may come down to the fact that the script for this thing kind of got tossed into the trash, and the actors were allowed to essentially ad-lib their lines. So who knows if there was any sort of intended explanation. But I think that there really is one, and it's just hubris. In his living version, Rowan is shown to be kind of a dick and not too bright. And these are the people who got him killed. So it's a bit personal. He wants to see them taken out by his ghostly minions, and then wants to do it himself, and he thinks he can. Why freeze them when you can more satisfyingly destroy them yourselves? It's just sheer cockiness. Well, also, when this is going on, he's possessing Kevin, and perhaps it's just like he says himself.
You know, to be honest with you, this guy's making me feel stupid by the second.
Question number 10.
And wait, I mean, how does Egon even have teenage grandkids?
Ghostbusters Afterlife revolves around some new characters. They're Callie and her two kids, Trevor and Phoebe, who are 15 and 12 respectively. Because they're facing some financial issues, they're moving to the farmhouse of their estranged grandfather, who they haven't spoken to in a very long time. Turns out that it was Egon, and Callie is his daughter, but this film seems to take place in 2021. So how is that possible? In the film, they show the original movie is taking place in 1984. Since Ghostbusters 2 took place 5 years later, that makes that one happen in 1989. In the second film, there's no mention of Egon having children or even a wife or girlfriend, so that would seem to mean that Callie was born afterwards. That would mean that the earliest she would be born would have been around 1990, so she's around 31 years old. And since Trevor is 15, she would have had him as a teen pregnancy at 16 years old. Now, that's all certainly plausible, and the actress Carrie Coon, who plays Callie, was born in 1981, so she'd only be 3 years older than the character, so it's not like that's too far off the beaten path. There's some thought that Afterlife ignores Part 2 and puts it out of continuity, and if that were so, then Callie could have been born in 85, which would give her a few years to make that less of a thing. But Jason Reitman, director of Afterlife, says that Ghostbusters 2 did happen, but the movie does give us at least a partial answer. While looking at the board of pictures of herself up on the wall, we see a picture that has a note next to it saying 1987. Freckle count has doubled. Braces will be next. And in the picture, Callie is at least 5 or 6 years old. There's another one dated 83, and Callie is much younger, possibly 2 or 3. But then there's this post-it, and I know it's hard to read, but I got my magnifier out, and it says right on it, birthday 84. And below it, it says 2 years old. So Callie was born in 1982. That means that she was around for the events of both Ghostbusters 1 and 2, and yet was never mentioned. Some have theorized that Egon was unaware of the little girl and only became so after the events of the film, but one of the notes is over her birthday in 83, so she'd be 1 there. And it says, received my B-Day present, which insinuates that he knew of her existence and was sending her presents, in this case, a soldering iron, and I think 1 is a little too young for that. I mean, I didn't get Stella 1 until she was 3. Now, that tells us what we need to know, because it says that she received his present, meaning that he wasn't there to give it to her. He sent it. Obviously, Egon had a previous relationship in which he had a child, and for whatever reason, that relationship ended. Based on his notes, he still stayed in touch, but also based on the photo wall, which contains only photos of Callie and none of the mother, there's some ill will there. If it were a situation where they parted ways amicably, I'd imagine that there would be some photos that included the mother, but there's not, so I think that he and the woman split on bad terms. It's possible that he was married and divorced, although it's also possible that it was just a relationship that went wrong and she was pregnant. I actually think that their split happened before Callie was born, based on his interactions with Oscar, saying that he had never examined a baby before, only a chimp. Any way it went down, that means that Egon had a kid, and knew about the kid all throughout the events of the films. Now the question might be why he never mentioned any of this or appeared worried about his daughter during the course of the movies, and that's pretty easy to explain as well. Egon was not really the most warm and open of people, and clearly was closed off regarding his personal life. Most of the discussions of his personal matters were either with Janine, who he could possibly be seen as flirting with, and surely wouldn't want to mention past relationships. And the second was the admission that his parents didn't believe in toys and that he straightened the slinky. And there's the possibility that he was just joking with Ray, but also it was relevant to the situation. So if that's the way that it went down, Callie was born in 82, and 2 years old when the first movie happened, 7 during part 2, and had Trevor at the age of 24. And you know, now that I come to think of it, we did see Egon romantically related to someone at one point.
You're not sleeping with it, are you, Ray? Oh,
You. It's always the quiet ones. You hound.
So there you have it. There's your answers. Time to move on.
I don't know. Cause like, there's like a new movie coming out, and what if there are like those Easter egg things that like I just don't notice?
You mean like you didn't notice the whole time that I was answering those questions, I was also putting a trap down under you?
Oh no, not a trap.
You know, that does make me feel good. Okay, well, if you... Oh no! Well, if you enjoyed watching that video, please hit the like button on it. If you liked watching the channel, maybe hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to get notifications of when more videos come out. And then go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/movietimelines, and you can help support the channel like these guys do and help keep me loaded in Ghostbuster gear. And whoa, because I gotta tell you, busting isn't easy. And oh no. Oh, she slimed me.